The three of us had nothing in common, and all they ever did was manage to piss me off.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard years. Boston, Episode 7, Beach Trips.
I don't know when exactly it happened, but during the time while I was in Portsmouth in COMDAC School, the girl that I had met in New York while going to ET school, her name was Kristen, by the way, in case you forgot, wanted to come visit me in Portsmouth, which I thought was a good idea because anything was better than hanging out with these two knuckleheads who I called my roommates. I mean, besides being roommates and besides being in the Coast Guard, the three of us had nothing in common, and all they ever did was manage to piss me off. So Kristen, she wanted to go to the beach, and so I had made a reservation at the same hotel that I stayed at when I graduated high school, or the summer that I graduated high school. The hotel was at the end of the strip and was really far away from like everything. I don't recall a ton of the details, but Greg and Todd, with the help of the morale van, drove me to the airport where we picked up Kristen, and then we drove to Virginia Beach. Greg and Todd dropped us off, and then they took off and they did whatever they were going to do. So we hung out at our hotel a little bit, and we, did beach stuff. We had dinner for a couple of nights, and then, as was becoming quite usual, she got all pissed off about something, and at the end of the trip, headed off to the airport, leaving me to close out the bill and figure out how to find my way back to the Coast Guard base. That's basically the short version without getting into any details. That would otherwise make this like an NC-17 rating podcast. Anyway, I was pretty sure it was Sunday morning after, Kristen had left all pissed off and whatnot. So I called a cab, and the cabbie showed up. It was this older guy, and I told him where I needed to go, and he did not look very thrilled at all to have to be traveling like 30 minutes or so away. Halfway back to the base, I realized that I didn't have enough money to pay for this taxi ride, and I was starting to stress out a little bit. Eventually, when we got back to the barracks, the guy pulled up front. The cabbie told me to leave my gear in the car and go get the money. Of course, I was thinking this jackass is going to drive off with my shit and I'd be really fucked. But at the same time, he probably thought I was going to dip out on him and basically, stiff him with the fare. Thankfully, when I got back to the room, I don't remember, but I either borrowed money from Greg and Todd, or maybe I had some stash of money hidden away or something. Honestly, I don't remember. But I ran back outside to grab my stuff, and thankfully the dude was still there. I paid him, and he was off in his way and gone, and holy shit. So, I know what you're thinking. What was the point of that story anyway? Because it just so happened that Greg had decided, because I had gone to the beach, with my girlfriend, he wanted to go back to Daytona Beach to see his girlfriend or something like that. I think he lived in Jacksonville, Florida, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But none of that matters, because Greg decided he was going to take the morale van on an extended trip. And for that matter, Todd wanted to go too. Oddly enough, I was a little bummed that I was not invited. Not that I would have gone. It's just that the jackasses didn't invite me. But as you can imagine, I was actually looking forward to both of them being gone. I got the room to myself for the whole weekend, which meant the bathroom and the rest of the room wouldn't be smelling like shit every day. Because, you see, these two dudes, they were your typical gross-ass dudes. Not like I was one too, but these guys, they took it to a whole new level. So our bathroom, I'm getting off topic here. Our bathroom had one sink, one shower, and one regular toilet. And whenever one of them would take a shower, the other one all of a sudden magically had to go poop. Yes, I said poop. Get over it. They both, I think, enjoyed trying to outdo the other one on how much they could stink up the bathroom. But the thing that really made it, okay, there's a couple things that made it bad, but the thing that made it worse is a few times the pooper dude would wait till I walked in to brush my teeth while the other dude was showering. Okay, so by now we were all very much accustomed to someone else, occupying the same space because you kind of had to do that in the Coast Guard and it was way more efficient. So I didn't mind, or it didn't bother me that one of them would be in the shower while I brushed my teeth or vice versa. I mean, I was in and out like for 5 minutes if I was brushing my teeth. But it's when some jackwagon would walk into the stall and start shitting his brains out and stinking up the joint. Seriously, try brushing your teeth with the smell of crap in the air. And, it's kind of like the whole brushing your teeth thing is a pointless thing to be doing at that point. They, of course, would laugh at just how bad the bathroom was stinking up. And if I'm being honest, it for a little while, it was funny, but I didn't want to be there any longer than I needed to be. So Todd, it would seem, if he's in the shower, Todd would try to force out a fart when he was there, which seemed funny until the smell crawled out of the shower like some disease or monster from like a really bad movie. And then it would seep out into the bathroom area and it'd stink up the whole joint. Seriously, why on earth why did these guys think it was funny? Because, look, I'm not poo-pooing dudes for doing it. Yes, that pun was totally intended. I think it's funny too. But at some point, when does it just get too much and it's just gross as shit? But anyway, so it was for that reason, amongst others, that I was happy that those fucksticks were going out on vacation, because I was going to, not vacation, but going out for the weekend and driving down to Jacksonville and leave me by myself. So that following weekend or something like that, after I got back from the beach and right after we finished up COMDAC School for that week, Greg and Todd hopped into the big ass whale of a van and headed off to Florida. I remember enjoying the peace and quiet, and the bathroom, most of all, wasn't stinking like shit. I had the TV lounge to myself. I was ordering a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese all to myself. And I think I ordered pizza like the entire time they were gone. I think I just ate the leftovers. But yeah, so it was cool. I'd watch all the TV I wanted. And I probably spending way too much money on a damn payphone too to call my girlfriend, because back then we didn't have cell phones, people. So that whole weekend actually was costing me money. Yeah. So anyway, by the time the weekend was over and those knuckleheads came back, which by the way, I was pretty bummed they were back, but also happy in a weird way. If for some reason they didn't make it back, well, I'd have to walk to class by myself. And man, I got spoiled because Gonzo didn't walk to class. Although that's not to say that I have any class. I crack myself up. But when they returned, they rambled on about stuff, which really I wasn't really paying much attention to, because I don't remember a damn thing about the trip either. So I really nothing to tell. Although I do remember that after their trip, it occurred to them afterwards that the Master Chief, who allowed us to use the van, was also responsible for checking the mileage on the van. So it's basically like Coast Guard administrative stuff. So it's nothing like out of the norm. They talked about what they were going to do, because when the chief went and checked the mileage on the van, they knew they were going to be in deep shit, or potentially be in deep shit. I mean, for a bunch of smart guys, dudes that they thought they were, well, mostly there's poopy dudes, you would have thought that they would have known before leaving, driving 100 plus miles in one direction and then back. You would have thought they had a plan for that. But if I'm being fair, no one said they couldn't drive that far either. It was a morale vehicle, and well, them leaving for the weekend was good for, at least good for my morale. It was probably good for Greg's too. And I don't know what Todd did. But so that Monday following their trip, Greg and Todd went straight to the Master Chief when we got to class, and to let, he basically they were going to go tell the Master Chief what they had done. I had gone straight to class, and like a good coastie, I sat there and waited to hear what would happen. For Greg and Todd, this was clearly a case of act first and beg forgiveness later. It was also them being a bunch of idiots who didn't quite clearly think that they had essentially misused and technically probably had stolen a government vehicle just to go on a weekend joyride. And probably because, Greg wanted to see his girlfriend and, well, he's had his own joyride. After what seemed like forever, Greg and Todd made their way back to class. It seemed like forever because, honestly, I was anxious to hear what happened. They didn't say anything immediately. They just came in, got themselves situated for class, but it was easy to tell that something had happened. I just had no idea what. They didn't look worried or upset, but they had that look in their eye, so I knew something was up. Class got started, and it was the normal blah, 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 blah stuff. Although this school was different than previous schools. At least from what I could remember, in ET school and radar school, we had learned not just basic theory, but component level troubleshooting. To be honest, I barely learned any of that stuff because it went right over my head. But the one thing that the Coast Guard instructors did well was to point out in obvious fashion, at least in radar school, which components were likely to fail. And so they put all kinds of focus on trying to troubleshoot those areas that had a high likely of failure. So, if the situation came up, you could actually fix something. But anyway, the main difference here was that we didn't learn any theory at all, which I suppose makes sense because we should have already learned that as a prerequisite for this class. And in COMDAC school, what seemed like the goal to me was to learn how all the different pieces of COMDAC work together. Did I mention that COMDAC was, it was made up of about 13 or so racks of equipment. Each rack was about, more than a foot wide, but I think less than 2 feet wide. And I think that's right. And the racks were about 7 to 8 feet tall. So basically, there was a lot of electronic parts to this whole system. There's no way you can know it all, which is, I guess, why they trained at least 3 people on the ship to make sure that they had sufficient amount of coverage. I suppose everyone had the same school. I imagine because Anyway, so I think they thought the process was that if 3 or more people were trained, at least one of them will remember whatever it was that needed to be remembered. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it totally makes sense in my head when I was spewing it out. Anyway, so way off topic. When lunch eventually came around, Greg and Todd came over to me and said that they, in fact, had talked to the Master Chief and told him what they had done. Master Chief apparently appreciated that they came clean because he was about to go check on the mileage of the van. And again, it was just a normal administrative sort of thing that gets done anyway. Whenever somebody borrows a van, you go and check the mileage. It's a thing. He had said he probably would have lost his shit if he had saw such high miles without an explanation. And like any Master Chief, he appreciated hearing bad news before the bad news surprised him and ruined his day. As a matter of fact, there's a saying that pretty much is, universal throughout the military. Bad news does not get better with age. So in this case, holding off just wasn't going to make anything better. So anyway, and being appreciative of the honesty of Greg and Todd, and so let me stop right there. They weren't being honest. They knew that they basically had fucked up and thought the best thing to do was just to rip off the Band-Aid and get it over with. they wanted to come clean before the Master Chief found out, which I totally get. And like I said earlier, he would have lost his shit. And because they came clean and, again, not being honest, I mean, they were honest, they did it, but they shouldn't have done it. He opted to do absolutely nothing about it. Because if we were actually honest dudes, they wouldn't have actually taken the morale van from Portsmouth and drove down to Daytona Beach or whatever they ended up in Florida. I wasn't at all surprised by this and happy that they didn't get into any trouble. If I'm being honest, I was happy they didn't get in trouble. We also didn't lose our morale van privileges either, which is really the most important part, because that would really have sucked, at least for me. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that Gonzo doesn't walk to class. Master Chief's thoughts on the whole subject was to tell Greg and Todd, albeit something totally unnecessary, but an appropriate precaution since we are all now accomplices. And by that, I mean the Master Chief, Greg, and Todd, and of course me. So Master Chief's instructions to them was to tell Gonzo to keep his mouth shut. And of course, I kept my mouth shut about it, except until now. School was pretty much like any other Coast Guard school I had attended, but it was starting to feel a lot like being back in high school. As I mentioned before, it's like we had the class bully, Greg. We had Todd, who was basically the sniveling kid who thought he was one of the cool kids and always wanted to be the center of attention. He did that by being loud and always picking the side of whoever he thought had the better chance of winning. You know, he basically just would ride somebody else's coattails. We also had the upperclassmen too, that being, you know, the old-looking first-class petty officer. And then, also we had the chiefs in our class as well. The chiefs would take their turns basically giving chiefly advice. And like most kids my age, yeah, I was a kid. I was maybe 21 then. But anyway, I know it's hard to imagine that I was a kid considering just how mature I act now. But I'd sit there and let them talk, and most times they could tell I wasn't paying attention. They probably noticed that I just started to stare off into space, and then they'd stop blathering about whatever sage advice they were trying to give me or whatever sea story they were telling. Oh, how the tables have turned. I think I'm the one that blathers on about nonsense now. Like, when did that happen? Okay, so speaking of being back in school, one Saturday morning, I think it was a Saturday, could have been a Sunday, but most likely Saturday, my roommates and I were still sleeping, and then someone knocked on the door. I don't remember which one of us got up, but whoever came to the door was looking for me. The person at the door was the watchstander who made the rounds around the barracks. They were basically like, you know, the night guard or fire watch. Their main function was also to make sure that if there was an emergency, that someone was awake to make sure that everyone was notified, like if the building was on fire. Oh, and they were also supposed to make some effort to prevent people who weren't supposed to be in the building from, well, getting into the building. The watchstander was dressed in their normal work blues and said that someone was downstairs asking for me. I had no clue who could be there looking for me. And why was someone looking for me? I didn't think I'd gotten into any trouble, but, maybe I did. I had no idea. But I don't remember exactly what happened next, but I got dressed and went down to the lobby, and there was no one there. The watchstander said that the person was outside waiting for me. So I looked out through the glass doors, and I couldn't believe it. It was someone from back home. Guy's name was John. And, we hadn't been the closest of friends back in high school, but we were friendly enough, and I was happy to see a friendly face. Albeit I was a little suspicious, too. I knew John through my younger brother, so I half expected him or expected to see my brother there as well. But nope. But anyway, I went outside to talk to John and asked him how he had gotten on base. And I knew this, but I clearly had forgotten that John's dad was either in the Army or retired Army, and he still had a valid military sticker on his car. So the guys, rightfully so, at the front gate, let him right through. John said he and a guy named Chris, someone I knew from school, but I knew his name and I knew who he was, but I don't think I ever spoke to the guy. They came down to go to Virginia Beach for the day, and my brother had told him where I was and that, it was kind of on the way to the beach. I'm not so sure but what was going on, but I ran back to my room. I grabbed a swimsuit, went back downstairs, and hopped in the back seat of John's car. I can't remember exactly, but it was a smallish car, and I think it was a Ford Fiesta, or it could have been a Honda Civic, and I think it was red. I know what you're thinking. This is going to be another lame beach story, and you would be mostly wrong. You see, we hadn't even driven off the Coast Guard base when Chris, who was sitting in the front passenger seat and John was driving, and to my shock and horror, he pulls out a hookah and proceeds to light it up. It wasn't just a regular old fancy tobacco hookah smoking thing. Chris, back in high school, would be someone best described as a burnout. I don't know how Chris is today, but I never saw him again actually after that day. I couldn't believe what I saw. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And holy crap, that smell. I'm sure I was trying to protest, but John and Chris were just laughing about it. Before you know it, Chris was passing the hose over to John so he could partake while he was driving. The car was filling up with so much smoke, you would think we were filming a Cheech and Chong movie. Admittedly, the rest of our trip to the beach was pretty much a blur. I vaguely remember us going to the beach, and I know we went by McDonald's after our trip to the beach. Anyway, occasionally I would make short trips, back home, and I would visit John and we'd hang out, but no more of that Pineapple Express action going on, though. Oh, and I should mention that the Monday after John and Chris came by, the Coast Guard base had a pop drug test. It was supposed to be a random sort of thing that the Coast Guard base does. Supposedly, you were randomly selected based on your social security number. And no, they didn't call my number. Not that I was worried or anything like that.
You've been listening to Gonzo, the Coast Guard Ears, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, and I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. This episode was produced by Mislaid Productions.
Now, where did I put that thing?